Didn't look like a great slate to start the weekend for week 2 of the NFL, but the closing windows of the early games and then the afternoon games, I mean, this is nuts. I mean, we didn't even deserve a close game at the end of Sunday night because the end of these two windows were incredible, massive comebacks, history all over the place. We'll get to it. But that's not why you're here. No, I know why you're here. You want to talk about Tua. So last week, I said, with some reservation, because I don't think I normally do that, because I was like, you know what? 2 years of this, watch the Pats game. By the way, I know a lot of people think like it was a Pats-related lean. I don't care about the Pats. I don't even think they're that good. I'm indifferent on Mac Jones. Maybe they're going to run the football a ton. Winning at Pittsburgh against Trubisky is not that big of a deal, especially with Watt being out. So I just watched it, was like, hey, they won, but it doesn't feel any different. And I said, I think he might be a backup, or he is a backup. I mean, I even said as I was doing it, I'm like, yeah, I don't normally do this, but this is how I feel, and I wrote it down, and now I'm going to say it. And then that's the breakout video. And in the first half of the game against Baltimore, I felt the same way. I was like, yeah, I don't know. And then he turned into a Hall of Famer. 469 yards, 6 touchdowns. I mean, he hits Gesicki on that third down, which is incredible. Hill twice, Waddle. He had that rollout against pressure where he threw it. Granted, being left-handed was perfect for him in that spot. He put on an absolute show against a Baltimore team now. Defensively, it's too early this year, but this is kind of a weird trend because they've had some bad defensive teams. This is arguably, statistically, if you go on expected points allowed defensively, this is Baltimore's worst defensive performance in 382 games. And Tua shred them. And what was unfair about what I said was that this is a new system, a new coach that clearly trusts him way more than the previous regimes that he's dealt with. Looking back at Flores and some of the stuff that they would do him, again, Brian Flores is a defensive guy. He's not exactly calling the offensive plays, but it was just very clear they did not trust their quarterback. And that's one of the first things I look at. I'll never forget it with Mitch Trubisky in Chicago. It's like, oh, they don't trust him. And I'm not saying that Mitch should be trusted, but you can start to see the way a team calls plays for the QBs. These QBs that are in this category of the unknown, the way they call plays will tell you a lot about how the staff feels about him. And then that will influence how I will feel about the quarterback. Really, hell, if these guys have him in practice every single day, then how would I know better than they do? But what was unfair is that he's loaded with weapons. I think they did some really smart stuff with Tua where it was quick, where it was, hey, this is automatically it's going to be an easier throw, but it's going to be quick. It's going to be a pivot out to the left. It's going to be show something here, and then this is one throw. Or instead of having you have to drop back and stay in the pocket all day long like this traditional passer, which isn't even, like guys are rolling out all over the place now. That part of it all was unfair. Now, the reason for my disappointment, even talking about him last week in the way that I did, was that it's because I actually liked him so much, is that I thought he was going to be really good. I thought he had this extra thing that I'm always trying to find when I'm evaluating quarterbacks, which I think is just really hard to identify because if I can't do it, hell, if they can't do it, they do it for a living, I don't expect that I'm going to be able to do it all the time. And so, was it that he was awful? Well, when the defense was below average for Miami, Tua had been 1-8. If the defense carried them, then they could win some football games. They had that run last year where I really think it had more to do with the schedule and the defense and field position than it did with just Tua being better than maybe some of us were giving him credit for. But it's like if Christopher Nolan wrote a movie where, again, Tua's not exactly Christopher Nolan yet. He was in the second half. But if Christopher Nolan, I like the movie Overboard. Check it out, kids. But if Christopher Nolan wrote Overboard, I'd be like, really, dude? We're going from Memento to this? Again, Overboard's pretty good. Would expect a little bit more for Christopher Nolan. So now the question is, have I changed my mind? Have you been listening to me at all for the last few years? It's going to take a little bit more than an absurdly productive, historic, all of the adjectives you want to throw on this thing. He was awesome. It could be because of the new regime and the trust and the weapons. This is the start of something new. But I'm not going to just dive head first in the opposite direction of how I felt about him for 2+ years. But awful timing, legendarily bad timing. And I will admit, as I said it last week, I still felt somewhat unfair about coming to that conclusion after just one game with a new regime. Kyler Murray's the best athlete in the NFL. What he did yesterday against the Raiders, down 20-0, coming back, winning that game 29-23 in overtime. He is the best athlete in the NFL, and I also don't think it's sustainable. We all saw the 2-point conversion. You've seen it by now. 85-yard scramble that took 21 seconds. It is the same guy that I remember watching at A&M the first time thinking like, wait, there's a quarterback ahead of Kyler Murray. The first time I watched him at A&M, I kept hearing about him. I remember Avery Johnson telling me about him when he was in high school, when Avery was with us at ESPN. He's like, wait, I'm not going to do the Avery, but you can vision it, right? You can already hear it in your head. And he's like, oh, he's this baseball kid. He's this football kid. And so I was kind of like paying a little bit more attention to him. And he immediately, when he got on the field, you're like, what are you talking? Like, this is insane. His ability to run away from people. Think about Max Crosby had him. He had him. And Kyler Murray, the diminutive Kyler Murray, was able to get away and make a play. We know without DeAndre Hopkins, this team is not as good. Winning record with him, losing record without him, almost a touchdown worst on offense. It looked like it was happening again because Kyler just wasn't that good for most of this game. But allow me a Joe Burrow comp, because Burrow yesterday getting his ass kicked again with 4 new offensive line members of that unit, right? They changed that in the offseason. We knew it was a big problem. It's a bigger problem now. I don't know what the hell's going on. He's on pace to now be sacked 111 times. That would be a lot. I don't think it's going to happen, but he's getting his ass kicked. And that Cowboys game was a grind. But a really good quarterback starts to realize, okay, these are the things that aren't working, and now I have to adapt to the things around me. All right, I can't rely on blocking, or if, hey, nobody's getting open, I need to step up the risk on some of my throws. And that becomes, as I mentioned, how often I'm trying to figure out this quarterback riddle. That becomes something, because I used to think like, oh, no interceptions, that's the best, never turns the football over. No interceptions is actually bad, unless I think you're like the Rodgers or the prime Bradys, or maybe even Mahomes. But at some point, you have to up your risk, as I've mentioned. And for some of these QBs now that have these awesome TD interception ratios, I'm like, yeah, but that's actually kind of bad, because it tells me you are safe all of the time when your team needs you to not be safe. And that's what Burrow, granted, he's unsafe behind that O-line, but that's what Burrow does and gives his team still a chance. Granted, they lost in the last second field goal to Dallas, but gave himself a chance when for 3 hours, nothing is working out. And you look up and you go, wait, this game is tied now. And that's what I look at with the Kyler part of this. I'm not saying he's Burrow. I'm not saying he's one of those guys that finds a way, but he did it yesterday when it looked like it was going awful for him, that nothing was working on offense. So if he's anything like that, if he's one of the quarterbacks where it doesn't look pretty the entire time, because I don't love the scrambling. I don't know how it holds up. I know it's a really, really great weapon. I think it's really great in week 2. I don't know how it's going to look in week 13. I've seen it before. It seems like his hits, when he's hurt, it lingers a little bit longer. We saw that at the end of the year last year. But now for Arizona, that start, when you go 0-2, 11.3% chance of making the playoffs versus a 42% chance when you go 1-1. Denver looked like for a while yesterday they were going to go 0-2, which would have meant losses to Seattle and Houston to start the season. If you look at the talent around the NFL, I think a good argument to be made that Houston and Seattle are among 2 of the worst rosters in the league. Maybe Chicago would be in that group too. Maybe we'll have a surprise a little bit later on from now. I don't think you'd put Jacksonville in that group anymore. Granted, no Surtain. Judy ends up going out. Simmons, the safety, ends up going out. But they're losing at home to the Houston Texans. And I'm like, are they really going to go 0-2? Russell Wilson coming in. And really a nice group of skill guys. Can I just do an aside here? Can we pretend that no one's actually offended by skill players versus non-skill players? Like, we get that O-line, D-line, linebacker, safeties, and all of you have amazing skills, that it's actually not an insult. It's just a thing, we'll call it. Guys that touch the football more. I guess that would be less offensive. Guys that touch the ball more instead of skill players. But anyway. All right. So let's talk about Hackett, because he's arguably got the lowest approval rating of a head coach on social media in 2 weeks. This is a new record for the quickest, lowest Q rating ever for a head coach. 25 flags in 2 games. The red zone numbers suck. It's all passes, which apparently, and the theories appear to be on this one, to appease Russ and letting him cook a little bit more. But the fans started counting down the play clock in Denver, their own fans, to help them out. Why? Well, let's run through the ends of halves here, because it's hard to be this bad, this often, this quickly into the season. The end of the first half against Houston, 4th and goal at the 1, delay a game, 4th and 6. They end up making the field goal, tie it up at 6-6. All right, whatever. Second half, Denver's down 9-6, 3rd and 1. They run that tight end option. They lose a yard on that one. They line up for a 54-yard field goal attempt. They get another delay a game, and then they punt. They burned a timeout by not having a punt returner on the field. They also burned another timeout because they didn't get a play in after a sack. Why did that matter? Because it's a week after they didn't use a timeout from about 1:11 to 20 seconds left at the end of the game at Seattle, where they brought Russell Wilson in and then they took him back out. They still had 2 timeouts left. I guess you could argue that Hackett was trying to at least play it safe with this stuff. I would actually rather not get cute with the clock because I also think penalty flags are thrown around so much on pass interference and defensive holding that when the clock or when your downs reset and you thought you were getting really cute by being like, we're only going to score with this much time left, I think I'd actually have more chances, even if it means I'm leaving a little bit more clock there. That's my own theory. Discuss if you must. So they don't use the timeout until 20 seconds left, 2 left, and then they bring Russ out and they decide, now let's kick a 64-yard field goal, which according to the stats in the NFL since 1991, teams are 2 of 35 on field goals from that distance or longer. So Wilson starts 6 of 20 in this game, 6 of 19 in the first half against Houston. It's his worst I think it's worst completion percentage in a half in his entire career. And then Denver starts booing him. They win this game. That's kind of irrelevant because the booing part and the Russell Wilson thing, which is so surprising, I want to talk about booing here a little bit. Would I ever boo? No. I work in the media. I'm not the person that should be answering this question. I guess if I brought a couple kids and made a sign and I was in my 40s and start booing like crazy, I don't know that I would do that. Again, I'm not a parent and I'm a member of the media. So I'm not the best person to ask. But I also think that the media, when they got on Seattle's case, when they were booing Russell Wilson in his return, for them to be like, how could you boo this guy? He's the greatest quarterback in franchise history, which is true. But that's not really the point. It's emotional. It's always weird when the person who has no emotional attachment thinks they should tell the person with the emotional attachment how they should feel. Doesn't mean the advice is wrong, but it's just a lot easier for the person that doesn't care. I don't care. Many of the media members that I saw for that Monday Nighter do not care. But Russell Wilson wanted out. He wanted out of your city. And when somebody decides they don't want to be associated with your franchise or your city and the thing that you care about, maybe sometimes care about a little too much, there's going to be a negative reaction. Guess what happens? Russell Wilson will have his name up in the stadium years from now, retire his jersey. Everyone will cheer him. And that will be the moment where they are grateful for what he brought to that city. But when it's pretty clear the guy wanted out for a long time and it just started to get weirder and weirder. And the other thing that I would add to this is this kind of backs up everything I always knew or thought about Wilson, where if I could have invested in, I don't know about that guy, I would have been able to retire because I feel like I was ahead of it. And I was always confused why people would ever even argue with me about it. We've had 2 former receivers, Doug Baldwin, basically send out a little petty tweet. I don't even know what it was, just sort of a cheerleader after Seattle lost, after Seattle beat Russell Wilson in Denver and, his return back home on that Monday Nighter. Now you could say, hey, he's just a Seahawk. Not a big deal. No. And then Richard Sherman did the same thing yesterday while Wilson was struggling. That's 2 former receivers, 2 former teammates. That doesn't really happen a lot. It's happened with Aaron Rodgers and former teammates. I remember one of the offensive linemen for the Steelers kind of called out Le'Veon Bell a little bit on the holdout, which is weird because you're just not used to offensive linemen seeming like they're anything but team first. But it just, I think, hammers home a point that, when Wilson's playing great, you sign up for all of it, as I would too. But like I was reading this preview of that Seahawks-Denver game from The Athletic, and there was a quote in there that just kind of hammers home all the stuff that I've been trying to say. Here's the article. Before the NFL draft in April, which Wilson recounted last week in the quarterback's telling, he was invited into GM George Patton's office, again, the Broncos GM, while Patton was studying draft-eligible wide receivers and asked to contribute to the evaluation process. Quote from Wilson, we watched every single receiver, literally. And when I say every single receiver, we watched every single receiver for about a good hour and a half, 2 hours. We watched every single guy. And then we came across this guy named Montrell Washington. We looked at each other and said, hey, he may be the one. There were 87 draft-eligible wide receivers for the 2022 draft. If you're saying hour and a half, 2 hours, let's average it out to 90 minutes. That's 87 receivers, 90 minutes. It's 130 hours. That means if you're watching film on receivers 3 hours a day, because you got kids and other stuff going on, that's 43 days spent watching receivers. Maybe they doubled up. Maybe it was 22. Guess what probably didn't happen? That. How about the Browns? All right, quoting Mike Santos, historic collapses. A lot went wrong for the Browns to lose this game up 13. I know a lot of people saying Chubb should have just knelt before going into the end zone. I don't know. 2 touchdown lead, minute and a half left. Probably feel pretty good about it. Kareem Hunt going out of bounds before the 2-minute warning at 2:02 to me is much worse than Chubb going out of bounds because you figure we're going to be good. Cade York misses the extra point. So teams leading by 13 points with 2 minutes to 1:30 left in the game were 201-0 since 2000. What if they had made the extra point? Again, Sando points out the team's up 14 with 2 minutes to 1:30 to go. We're 338-1. The only loss, the Browns to the Bears in 2001. For college football, I'm going to start ranking because we're going to have an expanding playoff to 12 teams where we're going to reward some teams for never playing anybody out of conference and having an easy division. And then they're going to have a chance to win a national championship. Awesome, sweet. It will happen, and people will go, wait, was Russillo right about this? But that's okay, whatever. It's happening. I'm going to rank the top 12 teams. I'm going to do it starting Wednesday. I could do some A&M Miami stuff here. It was a pretty light slate. I mean, I could talk about college football all day. I could do an hour on the NFL. I'm not going to do that. We're going to ask Trent about some of these things. But yeah, coming up Wednesday, I'm going to rank the top 12 in college football, and we're going to do it every single week.